Well, lots to discuss with our panel of commentators today. Susan Smith is a Liberal commentator, Ashton Arsenault is a Conservative commentator, and Anne McGrath is an NDP commentator. Good to see you all again. Thanks for being here. Lots to talk about today. Let's talk about the announcement today from the Liberals about maternity and parental leave benefits, making them tax exempt at the front. And Ashton, let me start with you. The Conservative leader rolled this out a few days ago, calling it tax exempt, but not at the front end. So there are going to be no taxes in this Liberal plan on the actual payment. So is this a step up from what Mr. Scheer was talking about? No,
I don't think it is. And actually, it sort of goes to the campaign's theme of affordability. I think all three parties had affordability announcements today. But the universal tax cut coming from the Conservative Party of Canada, if you actually look at it, and there was research that came out over the weekend, it actually does more for the complete tax base than the announceable that came today. Now,
that's the income tax bracket cut. I'm
Correct.
talking about on the maternity and paternal leave benefits.
Correct.
What's the difference between yours and theirs?
Well, I would also say, just from a tax standpoint today, we've had announcements for tax credits in children's arts programs and children's sports programs as well. The reality is the Liberal announcement does take it right off the top, so you don't have to work about it after the fact. That is the nuance in the policy, but I think you'll see a tremendous number of affordability issues come forward from the Conservatives throughout the duration of the campaign.
It's a big, the experts we talked to said it's a fairly big nuance, the fact that if it's not being treated as, if it's tax exempt off the top, it's not calculated later when you do, because you can get the EI maternity and parental leave benefits, and then you could have made all kinds of income leading up to that, and then you calculate the taxes on that. So, but if it's tax exempt, you don't.
But just before moving on, I mean, it's going to cost the federal treasury $800 million, whereas the universal tax cut's going to cost upwards of $6 billion. And PBO said that himself. So if you're looking for sort of tax savings over the long term, I think you have to evaluate the policies a bit differently.
All right, Susan?
I think the difference for parents is when that money comes in the door on maternity or paternity leave, the tax hasn't been taken off. You get the full amount on your check. That's the big difference. The difference with the Conservatives is it's a refundable tax credit that you have to apply for after the fact. So if you're talking about putting money directly in the pockets of parents, that's an immediate benefit. The other immediate benefits that the Liberals announced today were an increase of the Canada Child Benefit by $1,000 for parents of children under one. That's another huge difference for families, because we already know that the Canada Child Benefit that's been in place has already lifted 300,000 kids out of poverty, and that's independent people who've evaluated that. So that's going to make a huge difference for families.
They're also talking about extending 15 weeks of leave to adoptive parents as well, and working on a larger plan over time to cover people with maternity and paternal leave benefits that don't have coverage with
$250,000 child care spaces, including a 10% reduction on fees for that, and including some child care spaces of the new ones created that would be for people who have shift work.
And Andrew Scheer, by the way, said today that they would keep the Canada Child Benefit if the Conservatives were to win office. They said that's basically their idea, and and you guys have morphed it into something else, but they'll keep it.
And investing in education.
And let me start you there. We're going to get to affordable housing, which was the big NDP announcement today. And maybe talk to me about that in the context of these other announcements we heard.
Sure. Can I just say on the Canada Child Tax Benefit, it's important too, though, that provinces, you know, I mean, it's the combination really is what makes a big difference, I think. So, for instance, in Alberta, when we had an NDP government in Alberta, there was a child tax credit there too, and something like the child poverty rate was cut in half. So I think that, you know, I'm a little worried about some of the provinces and what they're going to do with some of these things.
Yeah, and many of these programs, right? It's a two-step dance to get these things done. Provinces need to play ball too.
Exactly, exactly. And you know, I was interested to see. I'm happy to see that childcare is being talked about. I would, you know, I would point out that we talk about it in every election and we still don't have it. So I would like to see real concrete plans for childcare. I did think it was interesting that just a few weeks ago the Liberal campaign said that it was a provincial jurisdiction and that they weren't going to go there, and now they've gone there. I'm glad, because I think it's really important. I think it is one of the things that has the biggest impact on women's equality, and it's a very good economic strategy. So I'm hoping that there will be good concrete childcare plans. With respect to housing, So the NDP is proposing affordable housing plan. I think that that our retreat from that, from housing, from actually having housing units built and social housing and mixed housing has been a real, you can see that across the board. You can see it in our healthcare system. You can see it, particularly see it in our cities. Is
it a retreat from housing at the federal level? I mean, the experts we talk to say that, look, the Liberals have poured money into it, but they also say that not much is happening, that it's a complicated thing to get right. It too involves the provinces as well. So, I mean, which party can lay claim to being the party to follow on housing? So
the Liberals put in place the first ever national housing strategy, and it's a $55 billion commitment. You're right, it takes time to work with the provinces and work with the municipalities, but $55 billion is going to make a big dent for housing across the country. They've also made changes, so that's on the affordable housing front. And and then there's the other side of the housing for the people who want to try and buy their own houses or are able potentially to buy their own houses.
At least in the high-price markets.
Sure. Yeah. No, just overall. There's a first-time home buyers incentive that is up to 10% of a certain value of your house, so people have a chance to buy their own homes. And they've expanded that cap on it in Toronto, Vancouver, and Victoria, the bigger, more expensive cities. So on one side, the Liberals are continuing to walk the talk in terms of affordable housing for Canadians. And then the other side, for those families who are, you know, on the verge of being home buyers, they've got measures in place that make sense for people to be able to do that.
Ashton, where do you want the voters to look if they're trying to figure out, okay, who's the party that's got the right message on affordability? Yeah,
I think this is a two-pronged issue, honestly, and it depends on where you reside, unfortunately. On the one end, we've got sort of affordability, and then we've got the other end, the policy to address that. So I think, at least from the Conservative Party of Canada's perspective, I think the thinking has always been, let's give more people more money in their pockets at writ large and create incentives for them to save, because unfortunately, the one reason why people fail to achieve home ownership is because it's very difficult to save and to get that down payment together. And that's why the RRSP plan was brought in for first-time home buyers up to $25,000. And that's why they want to reduce taxes across the board.
But there's nothing for affordable housing at all. The Conservatives have got nothing from
Andrew Scheer said today that's coming. There's
and Canadians are spending more and more of their income on housing. In some markets up to 50%, which is unbelievable. That's really, really high. And certainly for low-income individuals, it's very hard to find anything. I just took a look at you know, kind of downtown Ottawa apartments and one bedrooms. It's pretty hard to find any of them under, say, $1,600–1,700 a month. That's a lot of money.
Sure. Okay. Let me talk about something else that's happening, and this is around some criticism today for the Conservatives. Ashton, and I'll get you to talk about this. We had the RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki today holding a news conference to talk about these espionage charges against one of the senior officials in the RCMP, civilian official, and at that news conference she was asked by a journalist whether she wanted the Prime Minister to waive the cabinet confidentiality so the RCMP could continue to look in to see whether there's a case for obstruction of justice involved in the snc-lavalin story. And in that answer she talked about, look, I'm not here to talk about that, but the RCMP takes all investigations seriously. And then this is the tweet we got from the Conservative Party. Let me put that up on the screen for you. Breaking, RCMP confirms Justin Trudeau under investigation for the snc-lavalin corruption scandal. That tweet was later pulled. Mr. Scheer was at a stop in Winnipeg where he talked about the RCMP talking about an investigation of Justin Trudeau. And what's happened here?
Well, I mean, the RCMP commissioner did say investigation, but she said it in the general sense.
Yeah,
I think if you watch the clip,
I think I've heard every RCMP commissioner since the beginning of time say they take every investigation seriously.
But in fairness,
when there's an investigation,
the RCMP commissioner didn't say that officers interviewed Jody Wilson-Raybould, former Minister of Justice. She also didn't confirm that the Prime Minister hasn't in fact lied about this issue multiple times to the broad Canadian public. And I think where there's smoke, there's fire, and every Canadian believes that this is an issue that should be coming up over and over again because the Prime Minister hasn't given Canadians a straight answer on it, and it's embarrassing. But
is there a risk in traveling her comments at a news conference into a tweet on social media that says, breaking news, the RCMP is investigating Justin Trudeau.
I think that's fair enough to say. I think that Mr. Scheer probably jumped a bit too quickly, too gleefully, was too excited by this, and you know, I could almost even see somebody doing that. But to have the leader of, you know, the leader of a federal party who is running to be prime minister do something like that, I think it is it's questionable at best. I mean, certainly there is a story here. I mean, you know, I'm not saying that there isn't, because there is, and I would like to see you know, cabinet confidences waived and those kinds of things. I think there is something there that we need to get to the bottom of. We need to find out about. But I think that that was a mistake for the Conservative leader to do that.
And it's catching up to the Conservative leader. There's a tweet from everybody's favorite Scottish columnist, a guy named John Ivison with the National Post, and he said, he basically called out the Scheer campaign and saying Mr. Scheer's developing a habit of misrepresenting the truth. And he cited the John Venables story, which was the UK, that, you know, supposedly this convicted child killer was going to come to Canada, that had been completely debunked. The Faith Goldie story, who's the right-wing one, saying that their candidate, Justina McCaffrey, was not friends with Faith Goldie, when we have video of the two of them all buddy-buddy. And now this story. So Mr. Scheer's got a truth problem, that his campaign has a truth problem, and that could catch up with him. And when you have national columnists calling it out repeatedly, there's an issue there, and I think that goes to the credibility of the campaign, and they'll have to be careful about that.
What about that, Ashton? Does the campaign have to take a little closer look at how they deal with these kinds of stories as they're developing? And this is the age of social media, right? So there's this tendency, I think, in a lot of quarters to hear something, jump on it, maximize it, pump it out, and then
I'll admit,
see how accurate it is.
I read the tweet and I thought, oh my God. You know, I took it as news because it was coming, you know, it sounded like news.
Right.
Sure. We're also talking about a tweet from one national columnist. I don't think it's a large problem, but the reality is, and you will probably both agree with me here, we've got party war rooms watching every single thing that is being said across the political landscape right now. And yes, this appears to be a situation where somebody hit send a little bit too quickly before going through the proper vet. But at the same time, I just want to go back to what the RCMP commissioner said. She didn't say that RCMP officers hadn't previously talked to the former Minister of Justice. She didn't exonerate the Prime Minister. She didn't get anywhere near that, and I still think there are a ton of questions to be answered here.
Yeah, it's not likely the questions will stop for the duration of this campaign on the snc-lavalin story. Let me talk to you about something else. We've got a certain polarization. If you look at the polls and look at how this campaign is unfolding, you know, we've got a progressive and liberal strength in the eastern part of the country and the central part of the country, and a lot of conservative strength out west. And I think a lot of people are starting to wondering whether we should be concerned about that in terms of how the campaign, what we say during the campaign, or not what I say, but what political leaders say during the campaign in the context of what they want the country to be like when the campaign's over in terms of East and West, and what people should be thinking. And let me start. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, there are regional differences for sure, and you know, and I think that in our politics, in our economies, all of those kinds of things are, and often our demographics are different as well. So I think that there is a concern there. I worry about those kinds of things. When I saw Jason Kenney raising the specter of Alberta's separatism in a kind of a roundabout way by sort of saying, I don't want this to happen, but basically putting it on the table, I thought that was, you know, risky. I don't like those things happening, and I do worry about the tone of our political discourse. I think it's really a challenge, because you want your leaders to be responsible and to be respectful, but also to distinguish them and differentiate themselves from the others. So it is a difficult line to walk. I think that the way that you do it is by sticking as closely as possible to the issues and the policy areas and the positive offer that you have for Canadians.
And is it a conversation that needs to focus more on the ideas? And like one of the examples, Susan, is when I think the Prime Minister was asked about it today, and he specifically talked about, you know, there are Conservative premiers who don't believe in climate change, and that's what he's been saying. And I guess for some people, they wonder, because Conservative premiers have a constituency. They've been elected by people in their province, and is it more useful to talk about the ideas and not tie them to a party?
That's on that particular
and
issue
especially in an election campaign.
Well, and on climate change, that's a tough one, because the Conservative premiers have banded together and they want you to talk about it that way. If you go back to that Maclean's cover with those 5 white guys, and they were the resistance, right? So that on that particular issue, I think every leader we've got to find a way to keep to continue to unite the country under common cause and not divide the country. And I think it's up to every leader to not pit one side of the country against another, one region of a country against the other. And it's important that our leaders say the same things in both languages. We've had a few leaders, Mr. Scheer included, caught out saying one thing in Quebec on the abortion issue and another thing in English Canada on the abortion issue.
But we have, and maybe it's the way we run our system. But we have, the polls suggest that Conservatives and Liberals are tied at the top in terms of who might, and that's early in the campaign, who knows what might change. But it's hard to sort of get our heads around the notion of what can we talk about that, you know, that doesn't demonize, that brings the others along.
But that's what these announcements are about, right? When you talk about pocketbook issues and you talk about housing and you talk about childcare and you talk about affordability, that's everybody's issue to certain, you know, in regional variations. So the governments are doing a good job on that. When we get to the pharmacare conversation, which I'm sure will come up in the course of the campaign, that's a national issue too. There are regional issues. I think pipelines are a regional issue. The environment is a national issue. The one thing that does concern me, in addition,
but I go back to the Prime Minister in the last campaign. Conservatives are not our enemies; they're our opponents. It starts to feel like they're their enemies, like in the context of the way we're hearing the campaign. And I think that can be applied to different people in the campaign. I'm not singling out, but strip
it back a little bit here. I mean, Canada's a huge country. There's always going to be regionalities, and I think everybody on this panel wants to see a strong, united Canada. I don't think there's any disagreement amongst that. But at the same time, we've got a Prime Minister that has done some deeply hurtful things to a region of the country. I'm speaking about West Coast folks in particular, particularly in the prairies. And I think you're going to see a fairly competitive Conservative Party candidate across the country. But the reality is, are party leaders only speaking to certain Canadians? I refuse to believe that. I think everyone is in it to ultimately improve Canada as a whole.
I think this brings in the voting system, though, right? I mean, so for instance, if the polls are correct and the seat distribution is going to be sort of skewed somewhat, it would indicate, for instance, that everybody in Alberta is a Conservative. We know that that's not true.
Right.
Yep.
You know, so our voting system is a big problem in all of this.
All right, thank you all. Lots more to talk about next time we're together. Take care.
Thanks.
Thanks, Peter.